systems and collaborating with hardware companies to provide the software they need.
Awesome. And I'm Max Misher, and let's get right into it. So, starting with business and market considerations, if you are researching what direction to take your business, how do you decide whether the market needs a hardware solution or a software solution?
That's so easy. If you can do it in software, don't do hardware.
I would agree with
That is, I mean, I do this for a living, and like, if you can do it in software, it is always faster and cheaper to do it in software.
And if you don't have to do it with software, don't build anything.
Yeah.
Because the least risky thing you could do is never write a line of code.
Yep. Or develop anything.
So really what we're saying is like never start a business.
Yeah. No, and I think the real dividing line there is there are plenty of things you can do in software because iPhones and Androids are incredible, right? They have a ton of sensors, a ton of input and output, but there are a lot of hardware devices that exist today that truly do emulate an iPhone. This behind us, the Karoo GPS bike computer, it's an Android smartphone that you only use to ride with your bike. But it's a dedicated purpose machine that is going to replace what your phone could do for you in a way that maximizes that experience. So it's really when you could do it 50% of the way there with your iPhone because it's the jack of all trades, but when you get the master of that thing, that's when specific hardware comes in.
That's a really good point. And I think there's a lot of nuances in everything we're probably going to talk about today. So painted with a broad brush. If you found this to be true, I think when there's a hardware component, it's oftentimes a little bit more expensive. So expect to spend more money.
Oh, yeah.
With a pure software play, you need a laptop, right? And some AWS compute power, if anything. You probably already have a mobile device that you can test your application on, and you can probably get to market a lot quicker.
So what's interesting is it's actually the inverse funding situation is wild. Hardware, you have to burn all your money alive up front just to get to market. But once you're in market, you don't need to spend much in engineering to keep it going.
Right.
But in software, you actually spend almost as much money in sustaining and updates as you did to develop the product.
Yeah.
So it's really weird that you burn more money early in hardware, but in software, you have to always maintain a continuous burn.
That's correct.
Like, no one lets you guys go when they've got to market, right?
Yeah.
You guys are effectively just getting started to continue to maintain, support, upgrade, and do that. The difference is you can ship with an MVP, and the client can use and sell and charge for it. When we have a minimum viable prototype, they are still tooling an inventory away from revenue.
Yeah, and the cost of change is much higher for you guys, I would imagine.
Well, that's called a recall. You guys have software updates. We have recalls.
Yeah.
So you truly do have to finish engineering before you've ever sold one. You are clean sheeted and done, and you are.
Not a lot of beta testing hardware.
Well, and you can beta test, but it's not on production units. It is.
I guess A/B testing.
And that's how we do it is, we're going to alpha test, which is, we have two versions of alpha testing on hardware, and this is where funding comes in differently. You're going to raise money to alpha test on hardware, which is, you have a beautiful unit that Brandon in the other room is hand painted. It's usually 3D printed and then hand painted, so it looks real, but doesn't do anything. It's just a model. And then you have the other unit that's 80/20 aluminum bars hot glued together with wires running all over it and a dev kit in the middle that does the thing you're trying to emulate, but it doesn't look like it at all. And that's your first user feedback. So you really have to tell a narrative to your users to cross that bridge of, I promise this will become real. Give me feedback on the two versions, the looks and the works.
Yeah.
And then in beta, we glue those together, in which we're hand painting units that have circuit boards we hand assembled that are custom, but it's still not off the line yet.
Yeah.
And then you go to first articles, and then you ramp into sales.
So I've got two questions for you. When you guys are going to market, technology for even hardware development has gotten so much better these days.
That's why we exist.
Do you see that trend is going to continue to get better?
Oh, it has been.
Okay.
So Glassboard, the way you see this pan out is how much you can do per employee in a hardware development firm.
Okay.
I would have needed 5 times the people to run Glassboard at the caliber we do today in 1990.
Okay.
I would have needed 4 times the amount of people to do it in 2000. 3 times what I have today in 2010, which is about when we started. So we just did way less per person.
Okay.
And now I can just outkick my coverage because the tools are so good.
Okay.
The 3D printers print faster. The CAD software allows me to test more in simulation and move faster. So it's just about velocity per body.
Okay.
Right.
When companies get to scale, the business model gets more complicated in hardware. Typically, you've got manufacturing, logistics, fulfillment.
Yep.
Hopefully not a recall.
But inventory, supply chain management, and it's
Yeah.
all cash flow. So what most founders don't realize is, yes, it's hard to manage.
Yes.
But the cash flow is totally different than software, where they pay AWS the month after that user ran up the big
Correct,
bill and
correct.
gave them a bunch of money.
Right.
To grow a hardware company, you have to go get $1 million to buy extra inventory
Yep.
just to sit on it, just to go sell it.
Right. Yeah.
Because just-in-time manufacturing can happen in a few industries, but that is really, you still need cash.
That's a really good point.
No,
Really,
it,
really
it,
good point.
it is. Even after you've made the investment of tooling and you're selling, if Walmart comes and triples their order quantity tomorrow, you still have to go to a bank.
Right.
Right? Now, the nice thing is that's usually bankable.
Fair.
Unlike venture, which is expensive and risky money, you can go bank that kind of inventory
You'll
purchase
get
and
an
things like that.
SBIC loan or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the challenge is just going to go back to the original questions. What's the difference between hardware and software startups?
Yeah.
I think you need $0 to start your software startup.
I
Still,
would
you do
agree.
need $0 to start your hardware startup, because the first thing you do is have a pitch deck and a dream.
Right.
Then to get to a user test, it's probably 100x difference in dollars between hardware and software.
Wow. You really think it's that high?
Well, because I can do software in 5 minutes.
True.
I can open up Figma today as a non-technical software developer,
Yeah.
move some boxes, add some text in, and hit publish, and it makes a web page where someone could fake click through my fake website. It doesn't
Yeah.
work. It's not
Yeah,
a
yeah.
paid pilot,
Right.
but they could demo
Yeah.
what the
You can
software
learn
is
a
supposed to
ton
be.
with clickable prototypes.
Mhm.
100%.
Yep. Whereas in hardware, you still have to 3D model the thing in a way that's going to feel good.
Okay.
You have to make a dev kit that lights the LEDs up in the right
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
It's impossible to emulate that. It actually takes even more time to render it in a fake environment. It's easier often just to build it.
Interesting.
So I just think that difference is huge.
Okay.
So, more specifically for what we're trying to do, our goal is to get more pianos out to low-income students. And to do that, we could either make an app to teach people piano chords or lessons in that way, or we could create a physical piano where the keys are 3D printed and it feels the same as a piano. So on that note, is it worth it to make a hardware product to get the same feel of a piano key? Or should we go software because of the low startup costs?
So my son has been, my 9-year-old, my oldest son, has been doing piano lessons for a few years. And the question I would have is, can you actually learn how to play a piano, like actually play the piano, not just understand music theory, in software? You know, I know that there are iPad apps out today that I think kind of mimic some of that, but I don't know can I translate that to keys on a keyboard? And I truly, that would be a question I would have as an investor. Is that even feasible? Is the cognitive shift for a student, is that possible? I don't know. That would be the question I think we need to answer to answer that question.
I mean, what's funny about the answer is this is what you talked about right before the show, is just like, when do you build hardware versus when can you just do it in software?
Right.
And this is that you need that user experience. Like, yes, I could make my iPad and do a touchscreen,
Yeah.
but there's that tactile user experience that you probably need hardware to teach someone how to play piano.
Right.
But can you get rolling and get user feedback with just an app?
That's
Hey,
a great point.
would a
Yeah.
low-income school adopt a method to teach piano, and is teaching
Right.
piano a valuable enough
Right.
problem to solve, right? And I think you
Yeah.
did it without hardware.
Right. And I think, we'll talk about financial models in a minute, but I want to, who would pay for the pianos if you're going to print them?
Yep. Well, and my honest answer is, you may be surprised how cheap it is to go white label a tiny electric toy piano that is still a piano,
Oh, interesting.
and actually don't make your own when you can buy and relabel.
Yeah,
In the
great.
hardware space, just like in software, you buy licenses
Yeah.
to underlying softwares. This happens in hardware, just no one knows it.
Yeah.
Some of my biggest clients actually white label the internals of their product, and they just make the wrapper.
Great point.
So it's one of those things that's like wild to see when you're inside the industry. They don't actually make that, right? And
point.
all 6 competitors you see on the top of Amazon have the exact same internals.
Yeah.
They are just people buying different plastics.
So you should always go for the cheapest.
Oh, and so what's interesting about that is which version of the hardware they buying,
Fair.
right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes they're selling last gen, but
Yeah.
it's their 2022 version kind of thing.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, that's a pretty good transition to how do we financially create that model for a software project versus a hardware project. It seems like software is usually a recurring bill, whereas hardware is one-time use. You buy the hardware. Are there any other approaches to that?
I think hardware as a service, would be the thing that comes to mind, because as a consumer, we're already used to paying subscription fees for everything, and the thing that you're effectively buying there is the ease of mind that I never have to deal with this piece of hardware when it goes bad. I'm just paying for the use of that hardware, and somebody else is going to deal with its recall, its maintenance, its end of life, whatever that looks like.
Well, and this is evolving even more recently. We've been used to it with things like water filters, right? Where they just ship you filters every month and they give you the thing for free. Or things that are keyed, right? That you have to buy this consumable from the vendor. That's really common for us to internalize, but the market has always kind of bucked true hardware as a service for consumer electronics, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Unless it's a cell phone tied to your cell plan, you're not renting your TV, right? You're not renting your headphones. You're not renting your insert thing you bought at Target or Best Buy.
People bulk at renting their cable boxes.
Correct.
That's a great point.
Or their
Cable
routers,
modem.
their
Yeah,
modems.
the router. Yeah. I'm one of those people.
But what's crazy is it's actually now a thing. So now Apple's letting you rent your, with your cell phone, you can bundle those together and get on the Apple upgrade plan. You've got Oslo Sleep Buds that now truly just has a subscription. That's it. You're renting headphones for $20 a month. And it's the Sleep Buds, and it's truly, you can either buy them or you can just sign up.
Interesting.
So for your business, let me rewind back to how this affects you and not the market. To do hardware as a service, you have to have access to an inordinate amount of capital.
Yep.
And this isn't usually venture. Just most people actually think they go raise a bunch of venture money to buy their inventory. You raise your venture to develop your product and get your marketing off the ground. And then you go to a bank, and when a customer signs on for a hardware as a service agreement, because it's never monthly, you're actually paying monthly for a 6 or 12-month contract, and you as the company are getting paid for the cost of the good in that contract.
Right.
So the bank will say, hey, I'll give you a loan for the $50 of the hardware, because you're charging $10 a month for 6 months. I know you get enough cash to pay me back, and $10 of profit is yours. They quit right away.
Correct. Yep.
So it's all bank finance versus venture, which is something that's very important. You're talking about how do I fund my hardware versus software startup.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah.
So is it even possible to bootstrap a hardware company, especially now with 3D printers or making things in your garage?
So you can bootstrap development. If you have a technical team with technical founders and a decent 3D printer and some okay CAD software, and you're kind of okay at doing engineering, absolutely. So many hardware startups get their bootstrap start by doing it themselves, right? You've got a $300, $200 3D printer, and you've got some free CAD software like Fusion, free to use, or Onshape, and you're iterating, and you make it work, and you're gathering user data and user feedback, and you might even do some what we call paid pilots, right? So this is where hardware gets really weird and mixed with getting early revenue in software. Paid pilots are a thing that if you have a user that is so excited about the idea of this product, they're going to pay for a prototype that's hand-built. They know it's going to break. They know it's got no warranty. They're buying a cool toy. Collect their money, even if it's only $20, and give them the prototype. Collecting the number of users that have gone into a paid pilot and any feedback they've given you goes to a hard tech investor, and it's like, I actually know what I'm doing. I'm collecting money for a thing. I lost every time I sell them for $20. It cost me $100 in time and labor and parts to put it together. But I've proved that someone's willing to exchange money for a thing. In software, you do that all the time.
Yep.
You get free users, and then you start boiling the frog with more and more dollars in subscription, which is really easy. In hardware to prove...
Easier.
Well, easier. Compared to hard tech, where when you go launch, you have to cut tooling, make inventory, and do all that. If you can prove that your clients are willing to exchange money before you have to get to that investment, it's life-changing in the venture game.
So moving over to software then, it kind of seems like the opposite side of the coin, where with software you can iterate so quickly that maybe you don't need a professional team of software engineers. Could you have a low code or no code tool do all the heavy work for you? Or is there any merit to finding a professional software team today?
You want to take that? A little bit of that?
I can speak to it a little bit. In the end, I think, yes, there is merit in that. There is a lot of value in what you say, the low code, no code, get started with something simple. Kind of like the 80% solution kind of idea. There's a good chance you can get 80% of the way to where you want to be with that. And then the devil's in the details. That's where professional, experienced software development team is going to really shine, is that we've seen not this exact problem before, but something shaped like this, and we can kind of make fast progress on that. I think you can go a long way with a passion project, a no-code kind of, lots of different approaches to getting to that 80% solution. And then you call in the big guns, the professionals, whatever you want to call them,
There's a maturity curve you're going to hit, and as soon as you're ready to scale, a lot of those low-code, no-code solutions start to fall down.
So I was just about to say that it's really important in a startup that when you start, you actually do things that do not scale.
Correct.
Move fast, break things, do early things that don't scale to learn what the market actually wants. You can pivot, because you're going to pivot. You're going to change what you thought it was before you get to the end. Same with hardware. We do 3D printing. You can't scale that into making millions, but we can make 10.
Yeah.
And you do things that don't scale to prove that what you're making people want to exchange money for. And then you need to find a way to make it scalable. And that's just different stages of a company, right?
Yep.
There's startup, and then there's growth phase, which you're probably still doing things that don't always scale great in
Yep,
growth.
not always.
But once you start getting into that stability and profitability region,
Yeah, and you're scaling.
now you're having to really eat your veggies and make margin on every sale and have infrastructure that's easy to continue to grow.
Right. Where people often get wrapped around the axle is they don't accept that reality is going to happen at some point in time. So they think the early decisions that prove the market, that allowed them to get to X stage, is going to carry them forward without paying down some debt. And that's when people start to really, you start to see software platforms start to really fall down when they add large numbers of volume over a very short period of time. And they don't realize that, oh, we should have been eating our vegetables for a little while before we got to that point. So they're often making up time when they could have been a little bit more proactive.
Yeah, and they're getting their checkbooks out to rent more hardware.
Yes, they are.
And run more servers.
It ends up costing more money in the long run for a short-term gain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you scale too quickly, then it could all fall apart.
It's not necessarily about scaling too quickly. It's about being ready for scale and about making smart decisions to pay down that learning earlier than waiting for the things to break.
Yep.
And there's more art than science.
There's a lot of art in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like if you build something that's designed not to scale to get it out quickly, you're kind of like starting a new business every time, or is it just changing your strategy?
Yeah, call that more of pivoting your approach, because depending on what you learn, they might be small pivots, they might be massive pivots. You might have an assumption that my ideal customer profile, my ICP, the person I think is going to pay money for this thing is X persona, and when you go talk to X persona, you find that it's actually more Y. And so that's changing the who in my market. Or you might learn that this is my right person, this is my right ICP, but they really want something different. Now they're asking for a what change. So it just kind of depends on what you learn. Sometimes they're small turns, sometimes they're massive swings.
And sometimes you close it down and start a new company.
That's true, that does happen.
Oh, and that's the thing I do want to say, like, please don't be afraid to Phoenix the company.
Yeah.
I have talked to too many startups that are on their 5th mega pivot, and their cap table is full of investors from 5 years ago and 3 ideas ago, and they should have just said, sorry, we failed the first time, and
move on.
done a new one.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
And there's really a third entanglement of a software and hardware play.
And
where-
you spend all of the money all of the time.
That is actually a really good point. Yes. It just
All
adds
upfront and later.
Yeah.
a whole nother layer of complexity.
Yeah, and we all laugh here about spending more money all the time, but it's actually also a good thing. As much as it sounds like a bad thing to have to raise more capital and spend more money, you're building a deeper moat. It's so much
That's a
harder
good
for
point.
someone to come compete with you if you actually have to be an expert at hardware and an expert at software and raise enough capital to survive bringing both to market. If your solution requires the interplay of those two so tightly that someone else also has to nail that to compete with you, they literally have to do that to compete with you. So this is part of your competitive edge.
That's a great point. It also can make you stickier in the market.
Yep.
Which is really helpful, and it can create a better, more sustainable revenue model as well, because you're making money on hardware and on software.
When you're committing per people to your use case because they've invested in a hardware
Exactly.
platform, right?
Yeah.
Apple does this. I own an iPhone, I own AirPods, I have an Apple TV, I have an Apple Watch on. Like, I'm in their ecosystem.
You're in the ecosystem and you're stuck.
Yep.
Or it's very hard to
It's
leave
sticky.
that.
It's
very
sticky.
sticky.
Yeah.
It's very sticky.
But no, I think that the real magic in what I think are some of the best startups that you and I both see are companies that have identified there's a software solution to this problem and it's moderately okay or it sucks. There's a hardware only solution to this problem and it's moderately okay or it sucks. And we're going to build a user experience that is so clean and crisp that everyone falls in love with it and will never leave.
Yeah.
Right? I know you and I can probably name 3 clients together that if either half of our equation is okay, like it's ran on an iPhone versus a custom piece of hardware,
Sure.
you have to get your phone in your pocket, open up, do it. I want a light switch that just
all
works.
the friction,
If you can remove the friction for the everyday actions,
Yep.
you can get people to pay hardware money
Right.
and invest in a thing and still pay the subscription to keep access to it.
Yes. Now, you just exponentially grew your cost of goods sold at that point. So it's not exactly an easy thing to pull off.
No.
I don't know, from an engineering perspective, bringing those two worlds together, it's a lot of, I would imagine, back and forth and influencing and impacting each other in potentially negative ramifications without really intending to do so.
Right, even when things go well, the timelines have to grow so that there are places for them to mesh and, you know,
Well, and we also bail each other out if we work in concert. No, and this is the thing. We have a lot of clients that try and firewall us from their software teams.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, you don't need to waste our hourly rate talking to the other team.
Yeah.
Just here's their API. I'm like, no. I might need to ask them a favor. Like, hey, in software, can you change this calibration value on the fly because our hardware is kind of iffy?
Right.
Or vice versa. You're like, hey, we can't process all this data fast enough. On hardware, can you only give me averages? And there are things where both teams literally have to get the water and then bail each other out of the boat.
Yep. Knowing what's easy for the other team to do and hard for you to do is super important.
And in troubleshooting, it's always the Spider-Man meme with all 3 people pointing at each other like, no, you caused the bug. But if we're on the same team and both hunting for the bug, it truly is just how do we solve this the fastest.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, it's part of the reason why when we're working with a hardware partner and we're focused on maybe down to the embedded, the firmware side of things, we have test rigs in the office so that we can validate this stuff. Because you're right, maybe we'll ask the hardware to shift a little bit. Well, maybe we'll ask the software team to shift a little bit, and then there's no real easy, clean answer up front.
And there's never an obvious right answer until
Yeah.
both parties have
That's a
answered the
great
question how hard this actually is for you. Because you might
Great
think,
way to say it.
just move that connector, it's going to be way easy. That's in front of all the high-speed data lines, and that's like the whole layout, right?
Yeah.
And that brings us to our next topic. How do we ensure that these products are compliant and follow the right laws, especially when we start looking into the details?
Which 3-letter or 4-letter agency are we going to talk about?
Well, I would say a 2-letter UL would be one.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Because you're gonna have to power this thing. So the
That's
answer is
true.
put batteries in it or power it over USB, and you can go around a lot of UL things. FCC is if you make it wireless, like if it's going to connect to an app, you have to do FCC testing, even if it's just their checkout. Like not even you buy a pre-certified wireless everything, you still have to in your enclosures make sure it doesn't do bad things.
The shall do no harm kind of clause.
Yep. Yeah, just there's a standard test. You just write a check to a third-party lab, but you shouldn't skip that. Clients that skip that. You shouldn't skip that. If the FCC catches you doing that, like they're going to get you doing that, right? But in early alpha launches, when you're selling 50 units, there's regulations. If you're under a certain limit, you're an alpha, you can do that. But certain clients will try and push that out.
Have either of you found or believe that like hardware or software, like pure hardware, pure software plays from a regulatory perspective, one's harder than the other? Like I feel like it's always hard because it's a 3-letter agency.
Yeah.
I don't know, expect to spend a lot more money than you think you're going to spend to deal with it.
Yep. Well, and it really depends. Like I think you'll agree with this in software for sure, but in hardware it works this way too. That it's how good did you eat your veggies and plan to meet the standard, and start writing the code with that in mind. Versus we developed our product, and now we need to meet the standard.
Yeah.
One of those is cheaper than the other.
Right, and to some extent, backing up from that a little bit, some standards are emerging standards.
Oh, and they change as you go.
Right, yeah, well, which standard did we pick to aim for, and is that solid, or is it a moving target as well?
That's a great point.
Yeah, no, and in hardware it's really true. Like design intent with that standard in mind, because if you have to go test against something where you didn't design for it, you're going to fail. And then an update really is 8 weeks minimum, even if I knew how to make the change today, to get all the new parts built.
Yeah.
Well, and to get rescheduled through the certification lab and.
Oh yeah, yeah. But the nice thing is to speed up any of those timelines, all you have to do is spend more money. They will always bump someone else down the timeline if you're willing to write a check to get in front.
Yeah, that is true.
So how does a startup find these regulation committees that they need to get approval from?
Find a partner that's done it. It'd be my personal recommendation for anybody.
That's how you do it right.
Well,
However, no, I can answer this today that I couldn't have 2 years ago. ChatGPT does this so well.
So we didn't know we were going to get a plug for AI.
I actually am an AI detractor, so I hate doing this, but it actually is really good at this. If you're a startup and you have no idea what you might fall under, write a novel to ChatGPT, like, this is what I'm trying to build.
Yeah.
What regulatory bodies might I be regulated by for the electronics? And say these words: for the electronics, for the mechanicals, for protection of people.
Yeah.
Right, because they might pull up the CPSC, Consumer Safety or Product Safety Commission, or the FDA if it's a med device. But if you tell ChatGPT you want like the electronics, the mechanics, and then how are you interacting with people, they'll pull the right agencies out, and they'll give you a really good outline. That's not the gospel, but the longer the list that ChatGPT says you're going to be regulated by, the scarier it actually is. And the shorter that list, you know that you're okay. Maybe it really is only 2 or 3 agencies. I only need to look into these.
Right. That's actually really good advice.
Yeah, it gave you a barometer for how hard this is going to be. It's not right,
Yeah,
but
sure.
it's on average in low, medium, high, correct?
And I would say like the more, FDA versus, I don't know, I'll say like a smaller agency may
Or more
have-
common, like
more,
FCC.
Yeah, more common. Yeah, FCC is a great one. They might have higher hurdles, and that's where you might want to actually go find an expert that knows how to navigate, because there's always nuance. It's never as clean as what the website says.
No.
And having somebody that knows how to navigate the nuances and sometimes even just the website can really help expedite some of that. But you're going to pay for it.
Yep.
It's not an easy thing to do.
Let's say a third or 40% of my business is medical device, and we will not develop one without a quality and a regulatory
Yeah,
consultant that's not at Glassboard in the program with us.
Yeah, we see that a lot with our customers that are in regulated spaces. They oftentimes have experts that will come in and consult with them.
Yeah. But talking about your piano,
Yeah.
FCC, UL, that's about all that you're really going to have to get like regulated involved from.
Probably.
And then you're gonna have IP, just don't infringe on intellectual property. And that's about it. Everything else is optional. Like certain vendors might make you register with the CPSC, like Walmart might, to let you retail it. But when you're starting to sell these to some certain schools, you're usually not going to have to go for those levels of standards.
So as a startup, how important is it to get these approvals, to get a patent or any kind of legal structure? Should we just start making prototypes and seeing what happens, or should we get in the weeds?
No, always spend the $90 to form an LLC in the state of Indiana.
Sure. Yes.
Do not pass go. Do not do anything else other than form an LLC
do
in the
that.
state of Indiana. It's too cheap, and it truly does legally protect you and your team members. Let's pretend that you build a prototype and it had a rechargeable lithium battery you get off of Alibaba or SparkFun, right? Just an electronics shop, and it lights on fire in someone's house. You want the business to get sued, not you guys.
Correct, yes.
So always
do that,
Always
yes.
start an LLC.
Yes.
Um,
Other than that, though, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So what I've seen some med device startups do is, okay, if I don't necessarily want to go to market with a FDA-regulated device because that's expensive, it's time-consuming, it's hard, what could I go to market with that doesn't require a Class 2 med device for my launch? So if I take the intelligence out of my device and I do more telehealth, but I have IoT devices that take temperature and basic
Data.
vitals, but I'm just connecting you on my platform to a doctor, you get to do two things. You can start making money without having a Class 2 or Class 1 med device that you're having to get FDA regulation for to then sell. You're also getting to collect a lot of data so that when you want to apply some kind of intelligence and you want to go through that process, you got a lot of data that you get to use. So there's a little bit more of a moat. So you get to go to market sooner, you have a moat, maybe you have cash to help pay for that FDA regulation. And there are more companies that are jumping into kind of that med device space, but going direct to consumer without having to have the regulatory stuff day one.
and I cannot wait for the FDA to crack down on that.
I know.
Because it was okay bad,
It's-
and it's rampant now
Yeah.
with people becoming wellness devices
Correct.
that are de facto medical devices.
Correct.
And I think now, in the current moment where they're slimming down the government, I don't think we're going to see it, but eventually the FDA will
Yes.
get
That's as of right now. I'm just
Yeah,
giving
you have-
snapshot in time.
You have 3 years of
Yeah,
Wild West.
yeah,
Go
yeah.
forth and make money.
Yeah.
And again, talk to an expert. You just
always.
and you don't have to pay one. Go get coffee with an expert, and they'll read their emotions. You definitely need to pay somebody, even if it's not me. Go pay somebody to help you. Please don't do this alone. Or in about 6 months, call me.
Yeah.
Right, and we'll almost someone that's an expert, whether it's me in engineering, you guys in software,
Yeah.
regulatory consultant.
Yep.
They're going to want to help you
Yep.
because they're going to want you as a client when you're ready.
Yeah, don't let a contract get in the way of a good conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, well, that's kind of what we're doing here, so. Awesome. That brings us to our last topic, customer support and maintenance. How do we keep these products long-term once they're out there in the field?
I go first. Mine's shorter. So with hardware, you have to eat all your veggies up front. When you start a hardware product, you write your user needs down. The device should do this. The user expects the device to turn on, to carry a 2-hour charge, whatever you're doing. Then you make those design input requirements. The engineer goes, oh, that means I need a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. It needs to be rigid and plastic. And then you have to write a test to verify that the engineering requirements met. Oh, we have to drain the battery and measure how many amp hours does it have. And then you have to write a validation test. We turned it on and it ran for 2 hours. Notice how those are different.
Yeah.
Engineering versus use.
Yeah.
If you eat your veggies in this order, and at Glassboard, we do all 4 of those before we've designed anything. You call the shot of, this is the test I want to pass if I've done a good job before the pencil goes to paper. And then you can always pivot. You always change those throughout. But you know what you're shooting for, and you test that all before you make a bunch of them. Right? You validate that it does what we want it to do and what the user wants it to do, and then you make a bunch. And usually warranty claims are in your user needs. If user expects this to last for 2 years. So you accelerate life testing and you eat your veggies up front. So unfortunately, you have to spend all this money before you ever sold one. So raise more capital if you want to do this well and make time and set time aside for testing. It's always the thing that will get compressed the most when you run out of time in a startup, but at least start with some time to compress and have some left.
Yeah.
And then once you're in the field, there are 2 things. One is just customer support, which I'll let you guys talk about because you probably know even more about that than we do. And 2 is keep tabs on your manufacturing quality. Just do random audits of your factories, check, out of every 1,000 you buy, pull one out, open it up yourself, test it. Is it doing a general thing? Does this good? And then hardware's pretty easy, right? From that point on, you just keep making them and you're good to go. Now, once you get into embedded software, making sure you have security updates if it ever is an IoT device and making sure it doesn't become the vector of something getting into someone's home is important, but that's more of the software upkeep. And I'll hand it off to you guys for how much fun it is to keep software running and alive forever.
I think you alluded to it pretty strongly earlier, like software is never done. It exists in a world where all of the external variables are changing, so it has to change to adapt those, whether it's security updates or having the flexibility to deal with changing market needs. This service that we didn't even know existed when we released this software is suddenly the number 2 service of all our users, and we need to figure out a way to integrate with it. The good and bad of that is software is just a bunch of bits somewhere. They're all changeable. Hopefully, if you design, if you plan for that up front, right? So it's just, I think of it as just thinking about the lifespan as much longer. You're never done. You can maybe scale back a little bit, but to your point earlier, often you wind up spending just as much money after release with software as you do before. Having that mindset and planning for what does that look like. That might be the same team working fewer hours a week or some given time period on it. It might be a smaller team that just becomes the maintenance team for something. But you just got to plan for it until you're truly ready to just say, we don't support that anymore. You can never say, our software is done, go forth and use it forever. You may have to come to the point where you say, that software is just over.
We retired it.
Yeah, we retired it. We have this new version out there, or we recommend this other thing entirely, but not this half step of like, we developed all the developing we're going to do on it. We want to, especially if you're charging a monthly subscription, that comes with expectations, right?
That's a fair point. Yeah, it's until you're ready to sunset the thing and turn it off, you will always have to spend some amount of money. Your mileage may vary depending on your goals and depending on the maturity of it, but if it lives on this updates all the time. Sometimes it breaks things that you developed. That's why there's a developer release for a new version of this months before it gets sent out to consumers, because all the big boys need to go in and update their applications to meet
And the
those
small
new
boys.
standards. That's true,
Yeah.
everybody.
But no, and that's what's
Sorry.
and
That's a great
well,
point.
and that's what's
Yeah,
funny
yeah.
is it's a universal pain,
Yeah,
right?
that's true. That's true.
And then that's the fun part.
So, you know, I think in general, again, I'm painting with a massively broad brush. You should expect to spend, at least from as a minimum point, like 10 to 20% of your capitalized cost of what it took you to build this thing to just maintain it, to just keep up with this stuff.
And that's on a monthly burn rate perspective.
Yeah, annualized.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just asking, like, let's timescale this, like, not
Yeah.
the total cost to develop it every year.
Yeah. Correct.
Every
Yes.
year, this is
Yes.
in the last 12 months of development.
Yeah, if I
before
spend
you
$1
release.
million in the last year of development, I should expect to spend about $100,000 the following year to maintain the
Yep.
thing, give or take.
And you could always, and what we actually counsel our clients to do is actually train that role while we're wrapping up development.
Correct.
And we don't do that.
Correct. 100%.
You should learn how to maintain your
Correct.
software.
It's
And
100%.
maintenance is different than development.
And that's where I'm like, there's different buckets. Maintenance, I'm literally just saying I'm keeping the lights on. That's not necessarily,
New
I
updates,
want to
new
update,
features.
add things, continue to grow my market. If we're
Yeah.
talking about this in the context of a startup, usually you're going to start with a very relatively narrow focus, but
Yeah.
you should have a growth plan and a roadmap to add more things, to go after new markets, to hit different verticals,
easier to
grow,
use.
whatever,
Yeah,
whatever those
integrate
goals
with more
are.
partners.
Correct.
Yeah.
So your spend, your overall spend is going to continue to increase, to Grant's point earlier, but the maintenance to just keep the lights on
Is a real number.
is going to be a real number over time that you're going to have to pay. Otherwise, you're going to get in a jam like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, great point.
Well, that's about all the time we have. So any final remarks? Who wins, hardware or software?
And you're more powerful if you have both.
You are. Yeah. You're a much more bankable bet, but it's harder to pull off.
Yeah. You just got to be a better early stage founder,
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, great way to say it.
right? Because now again, it's all about when. And this is the one we didn't cover: is when do you raise in hardware?
No.
So I think that's a whole other topic. But
Yeah.
you have to get really creative about how you convince investors you de-risked it, and now you're worth more than you were in the last raise.
Yeah, great
And
point.
software is such a well-trodden path. There are ruts in the road. You just put your wagon in it, and here's the way you get there. And hardware is the artist of the founder has to paint a picture for the investors at very unique milestones for them.
Very cool.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Take care. Cool.
Sweet. That was fun.
Yeah. Hopefully that was what you guys were looking for.
It definitely was. Yeah. That was